don't think I could have gained the understanding I have of psychedelics without having taken them myself. I just don't know how I could have gotten inside that experience and understand what many people have rightly said can be an ineffable experience. I had some experiences that did have a lasting change. It wasn't dramatic. It was, you know, I think people who know me don't think that I'm a new man in any way. But I do feel in subtle but significant ways that I was changed. I think that I acquired a new relationship to my ego. I got a little distance on my ego. I came to understand that you're not identical to your ego and that there's another ground on which to stand and take in life and experience. And that's been, I think, the most useful thing. And it was because I had a taste of a non-egoic perception. I mean, I had a experience, one of my guided psilocybin trips was a experience of utter ego dissolution. And yet I didn't die. I survived it and I observed it from this other perspective that I had never known before. And it's a very interesting, very disinterested perspective where whatever happens is fine. And that insight or that experience is something it gave me a taste of another way to confront life that was less egotistical, less defensive. And I find I can reconnect with it through meditation. So that was a change, and I think the effect of that has been to leave me a somewhat more open, less defensive, more emotionally available person, I guess. And so what I'm describing is what my wife tells me has happened, and I think she's right. You know, I've never thought of myself as a particularly spiritual person, and I think of myself as kind of spiritually retarded, if anything, or underdeveloped, to put it more politely. And, but I was very envious of the spiritual experiences people were describing to me in my reporting. And I basically understood spirituality to be something supernatural, right? An experience that could not be explained by the laws of nature. And in the end, I did have a spiritual experience, but it wasn't at all what I expected. You know, I thought the opposite of the word spiritual was material, and that they were incommensurate. These two words could not be reconciled. But I came out of the experience feeling differently. For me, the spiritual experience was a deep, powerful connection, first to nature and then to other people. And these are two different trips I'm describing. And that it required a certain openness to let this, whatever it was, love or empathy or understanding in. And it made me understand that what allowed that connection to be achieved was the diminishment of my ego defenses. And that it was like, oh, that's what spirituality is. It's lack of ego. Because ego is what builds the walls between us and nature and us and other people, us and the universe. And so the real opposite word for spiritual is egotistical, not material. And that to the extent you can begin to transcend your ego, that can open you up to spiritual experience. Now, that may not be everybody's experience, but it was my experience. And that was a really precious insight that I credit to these amazing molecules. I think it's true that psychedelics have potential to address some deep problems of our civilization, and I see them as two main ones. One is our disconnection from nature, which is giving us the environmental crisis that we face, perhaps the most serious problem that we've ever faced as a civilization. And the second is the tribalism that is so ascendant right now. Both of those problems are connected. They both flow from an objectification of the other, an inability to see that you're part of it, you're the same. That allows you to detest people, to mistreat them, to build walls against them. Same with the objectification of nature. It allows you to abuse it, to extract. It allows you to put pigs in confinement agriculture. I mean, all those things flow from objectification. The loss of ego and the reduction of our defenses creates a very different experience of the other. The other is you. There's no difference. Now that sounds like an antidote for a civilization, but I don't think it's possible to prescribe a medicine for an entire civilization. How many people would need to have this experience for that to change? I don't know. Maybe just certain people need to have the experience for it to change, people with power? I don't know. But I think it's a dream. It's a lovely dream, but I think it's a dream that you can use a medicine to change consciousness on a civilization-wide level that will change things. Perhaps you change the consciousness of people who can tell stories so compellingly, make movies so beautifully, write symphonies so beautifully that contributes to a consciousness change. But we don't have a model for prescribing to a civilization, except for like fluoride. And I think that's very different than LSD in the water supply. I struggle with what the best term is. The word drug has two associations. One is illegal drugs, and it ends up lumping psychedelics with cocaine and heroin, opiates, and that seems wrong. And then there's drugs like you take your Ritalin or your Adderall or your SSRI. Those are drugs too, and yet to the extent they're healing, they're medicines, although people don't just use them for healing. So sometimes I call them medicines, sometimes I call them drugs, sometimes I call them substances. Some people want to call them entheogens, the God within. And I respect that, but it seems like a very pushy way to describe it. It's like saying, take your spirituality. So I'm not sure what the best word is. I think we need to work on that. But the point that these drugs are in a class of their own, I'm talking about the classic psychedelics, psilocybin, LSD, DMT, they all work on similar brain receptor networks. They share several qualities. They're non-addictive, they're relatively non-toxic, they're less toxic than many drugs that you have in your medicine cabinet right now that you bought without a prescription. There's no lethal dose. It's important for people to understand this because there are these scare stories out there that mostly date to the 60s. That's not to say they don't have risks. There are psychological risks, and people need to be aware of that some people do have psychotic episodes on psychedelics. Some of them are misdiagnosed. They're really just panic attacks that subside, but some are real. And so people need to understand that as a psychological matter, it's a momentous step to use these drugs, and they should be approached with great caution, great respect, and whenever possible in the company of a guide, and someone who really knows the territory, and who's going to stay close to ground and can help you if you get into any trouble. I think the most common misunderstanding of psychedelics is that they make you crazy, and they lead to insanity. And the least known thing about them is the story that I'm telling in this book, which is that in certain cases, for certain people, they make you sane. It's that simple. I think when capitalism gets hold of psychedelics, they may change, and everybody should be alert to that. Microdosing represents taking this incredibly powerful, transformative, disruptive chemistry and turning it into another productivity drug, like Adderall or, I don't know what the drug is that people take to stay awake all night to finish their work. Because here you have this thing that normally you have to have this devote a day to and step out of your normal life and all your habits, and you don't go to work to have this experience, and suddenly there's something you can pop in the morning on with your vitamins and go off to work and be a more efficient worker, a more creative worker. There may be a place for that, but it seems like a classic co-optation. It's a domestication of this powerful, somewhat wild force. And it's interesting. I don't mean to make a value judgment about it, but I think everyone should be careful that capitalism is even more powerful than psychedelics, and it will find a way to turn this to its own uses. There's some tensions in the psychedelic community among people going down a profit-making route and people sticking to a more academic and nonprofit route. I don't really have a particular position at this point about it. I think that there is a case to be made that the marketplace allows you to scale up really quickly. I mean, in other words, if corporations get involved, they'll have the capital to do the studies, to promote the drugs, to get it into as many people's hands as possible, as quickly as possible. That's the argument. The other argument is that you're sort of creating an enclosure around this. You're creating a monopoly on something that should be shared. But you really can't monopolize psilocybin. It grows. It continues to grow. It grows all over this country. And so that someone might lock up some manufacturing method for psilocybin pills, but that's not going to change people's access to it if they want to reach it. So I think it's too wild to be completely controlled. So I don't worry about that too much. I think if you have competing camps of researchers and one of them can't get to the manufactured psilocybin as quickly as the others, and yeah, these are the kinds of fights that erupt all the time. But I think that the academic work will go on regardless, and that there are going to be many different paths that these drugs will take into our culture, and I can't say yet which is the best one. We're demonstrating now in university trials the healing potential to deal with certain kinds of mental illness like depression, anxiety, obsession, addiction. And I think that's all very exciting. There's still a lot of work to be done. But I think it would be a shame if we completely medicalized these substances and lost track of what one researcher memorably described to me as the betterment of well people. Yes, there are people who have diagnosable pathologies like depression, but we all have depression sometimes. We all have addiction sometimes, addictive behaviors in our lives. We all get obsessive. I mean, we all have kind of dilute versions of those things. It's a spectrum, and that in my own experience, psychedelics is a very good tool for breaking out of habitual ways of experiencing life. These kind of rote responses we have to whatever happens to us. We're all stuck in certain grooves, and I think part of the power of the drugs is that they can shake us out of those grooves and allow us to create some new paths. So I don't think there's a danger that the doctors will get a hold of it and then no one else will. I think that they'll still be available underground. It would be great if it were legally possible for people to have guided psilocybin experiences or LSD experiences, and that could well happen. I mean, once doctors can prescribe it, they can prescribe it off-label. I mean, who's to say there won't someday be a mental health spa operated perhaps by the Psychedelic Society with a doctor employed to write the prescriptions and screen everybody really carefully and prepare everybody really carefully. The disadvantage of a prohibition of something is you can't regulate it. Anything goes beneath that prohibition. Whereas if you move toward a legalization of some kind, you can set in place the kind of controls and regulations that you need to make optimal use. I don't believe in a kind of straight out legalization like we're seeing with cannabis. Anybody over 18 can have access. I think these substances are too powerful. And the lesson of the traditional societies that have used them, that we should have paid more attention to in the 60s, is that there's always an elder or guide or someone who knows the territory, that people don't take them carelessly, they take them for carefully articulated purposes at certain times, that there's always some ritual or ceremony around it. There's a cultural container. We don't know what that appropriate container is for our culture. There's the medical container, but there needs to be another one too. And that's very important work that needs to be done.